Hey there, welcome to this video, and in this particular video we are going to create a complete full stack application with the help of Angular, Spring Boot, MySQL database. We are also going to use tools and technologies like Lombok and JPA, and we are also going to use Bootstrap. Okay, so yeah, this is what our application is going to be all about. You can see the interface available over here in my browser. Okay, so basically it's a voting application where you will see polls over here and with multiple options, right? And you can vote any of the options you would like, right? And you have an option to create poll as well. So I can create a poll and I can say which city are you from? Okay, and you can add an option like San Francisco, okay, London, and so the poll should have minimum 2 options. Okay, it does not make sense to create a poll with just one option, right? You should have at least 2 options, and if you want to add more options, you have a button over here you can add, and the moment you add this, you will see remove button being enabled, and you can remove if you wish to. Okay, so you can add as many options as you like, and you can remove until you have at least 2 options. Okay, so London, you can say you can add cities. You can say Paris over here. Okay, you can add Mumbai. Okay, so you can add these kind of options and you can create a poll. Now the poll that you create, you'll see over here. Okay, and you can conduct voting over here. Okay, you can vote any options. All right, so this is a complete full stack application, and whatever data you are seeing over here is completely dynamic. So even if I hit refresh, you'll see the data being there, right? It's not cleared away because it's coming in right from the database. It's persistent. So I'll show you. So what we are doing over here is, this is the front end that we have. We are going to make use of Angular over here. Okay, this is the entire application that we are going to build, and I'm going to code everything line by line. Okay, you're going to see everything line by line. I'll explain what's happening. Here we have the backend code. This is Spring Boot, and we are making use of all these dependencies. You can see quite a few dependencies like Lombok, MySQL, JPA. Okay, all of this is being stored into a database. So if I select, so I created a new poll, right? So if I run this, you'll see which city are you from, right? And you can even see the options, okay, along with the votes, right? So you can see over here, Brazil is something that, not Brazil. So I added San Francisco, London, Paris, and Mumbai, and you can see the corresponding vote count. So we have a database as well, along with this entire application. So that is the beauty of this particular project. It's a complete full stack project. It is going to give you an end-to-end overview of how a application works. So you are not just building backend and you are assuming, okay, this is how things will be used, but you're actually going and coding the front end as well. And this can help you give a good start for beginners who are looking to build or who are looking to learn how to build application using Spring Boot. Okay, so this is an absolute course for beginners as well. Even experienced professionals can take if they want to build simple applications and get their hands dirty. Okay, you can of course enhance this application as well. Okay, you can add a lot of features if you want to, depending on your use case, but I've kept things simple, straightforward. I have avoided unnecessary complexities. Okay, we are making use of Bootstrap CSS. We are not writing any sort of CSS. So I'll also show you how you can integrate Bootstrap into your Angular application. Okay, and yes, this application I code from scratch. Okay, for backend, I'll take you to Spring Initializer. I'll show you how you can create a project. And for front end, I'll show you how you can install Angular, how you can, create a new project, how you can create components, services, okay, what's the structure, all of that. And for database as well, we are going to create a new schema. So that from the beginning, and I'm going to code line by line, like I said. Okay, so this is a very hands-on course that you should take. And yep, beginners are also welcome. Experienced professionals are also welcome. And we are going to have a lot of fun, right? So goes without saying, if you're following my videos and if you like the content, then hopefully you should subscribe, like, and support the channel. And in the comment section, let me know who you are, where you're joining in from, or just drop in the comment section to say hi, because it helps with the YouTube algorithm. All right, so that's the only support I ask for. So I hope you are excited to get started, and without a further ado, let's jump right in. So now it's time that we begin taking the first step towards building our application, and the first step is, of course, creating our project. So we are going to begin with backend, and here the first thing we are going to do is we are going to visit our favorite website. Which is our favorite website when we do Spring Boot development? It's Spring Initializer, start.spring.io. So of course over here I'm going to basically set up the entire project. So I'll just zoom in a bit so that you can see clearly what I'm doing. I'm going to select Maven over here. Okay, we're going to do some selections. Maven as my build tool. You can select Gradle or whatever you want to. It's totally fine. I'm going to select Spring Boot version. I'm going to add the project metadata. So I'll scroll down a bit. Okay, and project metadata, I'll say the group ID is com.voting. Okay, I can say application. Artifact is voting app over here. Okay, something like this. Or I'll just remove the hyphen. Okay, and you can add the description. Okay, voting app over here, depending on what you want. I'll select packaging is jar, Java version 17. You can select the latest version as well. That's absolutely okay. All right, scroll up, and I'm going to add the dependencies. So there are a few dependencies that we are going to need. Okay, so I'll first say add. We'll say web over here. First thing first, because of course this is a web application that we are building, including RESTful API. So this is what we are going to need if we are building something web related, including RESTful API. So that's what we are doing. Another thing we are going to need is JPA. So we are going to make use of Java Persistent API or Jakarta Persistent API over here. Okay, that is something that I'll get added over here. We are also going to need MySQL over here, MySQL driver. Okay, because we are going to work with MySQL over here, right? Because that is a database where we'll persist things. Now, if you don't want to make use of MySQL, you're free to use PostgreSQL. Okay, PostgreSQL. This is a driver that you will have to add just in case you decide to use this database. Okay, it's totally up to you, but I'm choosing MySQL driver over here. I'll add one more thing called Lombok. Lombok will help us reduce our boilerplate code. So basically it will automate, or it will allow us to generate constructors, getters, setters just with the help of one notation, right? Or one annotation, I should say. Okay, not notation. So this is done. Okay, I don't think we need anything else right now. Okay, if we need anything else, we can of course revisit the website. You can add the dependency over here. Go to Explore, because in Explore is where you can see the entire code being generated, the preview of code, and you can copy the dependency, whichever you want to get. Okay, so you can see over here in the preview, okay, you can see the entire project preview over here that you can see, right? So you can just browse through. Okay, what I'll do is I'll close this and I'll say generate. Now, the moment you say generate, it is going to generate a zip file, and I would encourage you, or I would request you to get this zip file and store it in your workspace or in your folder where you're going to do all the development. So I would encourage you all to create a folder on your local machine where you have the development files for this project. Okay, and that is where you're going to save this as well. So I'll just click generate and I'll save it in the folder of my choice. So you can see here is where I'm going to have all the project related stuff for this particular project. So I've navigated to this folder and I'm going to say save over here. Okay, the moment I say save, I have this folder open over here. It is going to actually add a zip file, okay, into this project. You can see over here, it's a zip file. I would encourage you all to unzip it. Okay, so if you go inside, you'll see the application over here. Okay, you can right click and you can unzip it with any unzipping tool over here. Okay, and you can see this is a project that I have. Okay, with all the files. Okay, so all the files we have now over here. Now what we need to do is we need to make use of IntelliJ to open this project into IntelliJ. Okay, that is what we are going to do. Okay, so what I will do is here I have IntelliJ open. Okay, so open IntelliJ like this. Now you can see all the past projects over here, which is absolutely okay. I use IntelliJ a lot. Okay, so you will see a lot of projects, but if you are new to IntelliJ, you won't see all these projects over here. Okay, so I'll say open because we need to open a project. The project is already created. So I'll say open over here. Okay, and okay, it's we need to navigate now to the folder. So I'll head over to voting app. Okay, and you can see over here, this is the voting app that we just extracted, right? And what we need to do is we need to select pom.xml over here. Okay, and I'll say okay. Now it is telling us, it's pom.xml is a project file. Okay, so it identified that this is a part of project. So do you want to open the entire project or just the file? I want the entire project, right? So I'll say open as project, and you can see the entire project being opening and all the Maven dependencies and everything is being scanned at the bottom right. You can see resolving dependencies and everything is being scanned. We'll wait for a while, and depending on your system speed, it will take some time and it will open the entire project like this. Okay, you can see, and you'll see the entire project appear over here. Okay, you can see pom.xml. Okay, these are all the values that we have put in, like group ID, artifact ID. Okay, and you can see all the dependencies here. Okay, you can see MySQL connector, everything being added over here. Okay, so be sure to follow these steps, and you can see the application main file also appear over here. Okay, so yeah, our project setup is done and we are ready to start building this application. All right, so I hope you have been able to follow these steps, and I hope this was useful. So now it's time that we begin talking about the API and what all endpoints we are going to build. So here what I've done is I've set up a table. Okay, and we are going to talk about each API with respect to the endpoint, the method we are going to need, the description of the API, what request body is it going to need, and the response it should give. Okay, now make a note that this information is something that is planned. Okay, and during the course of building, there is a possibility that we might feel, okay, that this API should return this instead of this for a particular thing to work in a proper way. Okay, so it might change, but it's good to start with a plan, and this is a plan that I'm presenting. Okay, this is how you should also do it. You should have a complete idea of what all endpoints you need for a particular project that you're going to build. Okay, it makes things easy and help you gauge the development effort and time that you're going to need. Okay, so let's begin creating poll. Of course, it's a polling application, right? So there will be polls inside our voting application, right? Which a person can come and vote. Okay, so we'll create a poll. There has to be an API that will facilitate that. So this is the endpoint. Here's the method post. This creates a new poll with options for voting. Okay, and the request body is going to be the post JSON along with the options. Okay, and you can see over here the response is 201 created with the created poll. Okay, the next API is going to be get all the polls. So when the application loads for the first, or if you refresh it, okay, or it loads for the first time or something like that, this API can be called and it will retrieve the list of all the polls from the backend, and it will show 200 okay with the list of poll object. Get poll by ID. There can be scenarios wherein you might want to fetch a particular poll by its ID. So this API is a get request which allows that. Okay, and it gives you 404 not found if the poll object is not found. Okay, vote on poll. So if you are creating a voting application, so you are allowing users to submit vote. So you can basically have an endpoint that allows the vote. So you can have API polls vote. This is going to be the endpoint, and it is going to submit a vote for a particular option in a poll. And over here in the request body, you are going to accept a poll ID and the option. So both these things are going to be accepted. And here you have post. Okay, this is a post request. And yeah, this is what the entire API structure or the API plan is going to be. All right, it's pretty straightforward. We are just going to need some APIs, and we'll be building this step by step. So let's jump right in. So now it's time that we begin with the next step in our application. So I have the voting application ready. I'll try running it. Okay, let us see what happens. So it's loading and okay, we get an error. So the error is basically it's trying to look for a database. Okay, why it's trying to look for a database? So you can see over here. Okay, here it threw an error. It says there's no data source configured. Okay, you can see failed to configure a data source. Okay, so I'll tell you what's happening. So here in pom.xml, we have added things like JPA. Okay, we have added things like MySQL. So Spring Boot thinks that, okay, there is an auto configuration feature with Spring Boot. So what it thinks is you have added JPA, you have added MySQL. So of course the configuration need to be done for the database. Now how it will be done? There is some configuration that user must have specified or the developer must have specified. And it tries to look for a configuration, but we have not added any sort of configuration. So it's throwing an error. So we need to add the configuration. Where will we add it? We'll of course add it in our application.properties. Okay. And I'll just minimize this so that we get some more room. So here we are going to have some configuration for database. Okay. So I'll say database config here. Okay. Something like this. Okay. Now I'll start adding the configuration. So I'll first say spring.datasource.url. This is one thing that we are going to add. Okay. I'm going to add a spring.datasource.username, something like this over here. I'll also copy this entire thing. Okay. Because this is common. So I'll say spring.datasource.password. Okay. We're going to add the password. I'm going to say spring.gpa.hibernate.ttl-auto. This is one property that we need to configure. And then I'm going to have spring.jpa. Okay. spring.jpa.properties.hibernate.dialect. Okay. This is something we need to add. Okay. So these all properties we are going to configure. So we are telling Spring Boot auto configuration that, hey, this is the URL which where our database resides and you need to configure this. This is how you connect with the help of username and password and schema management. So we need to specify schema management over here as to what is supposed to happen if there is any update in the schema. Okay, so this won't be hyphen, this will be full stop over here. Okay, so if there is any change in the entities or anything, how will it reflect onto the database? Okay. And then you have the dialect. Okay, dialect you need to specify because different databases have different kinds of queries that they need. So for example, if there is MySQL and PostgreSQL, some queries differ. So you need to specify the dialect that the application is supposed to use. Okay. Now, before we configure all of this, what we need is we need a database as well. So I'll come over here to MySQL. I'll make sure I have a connection. So you can see, let me close this connection tab. So here I have already created a connection in MySQL workbench to my MySQL database. Okay. And there's a connection. So I'll select this. I'll come over here. Okay. Now over here, what I'm going to do is here on the left hand side, you can see the list of all the databases or schemas that I have. So I'll right click. I'll say create a schema. I can say voting app over here, something like this. Okay. And I'll say apply. It'll say create schema, voting app. I'll say finish and it's done. You can see it's done. You close everything. Okay. And over here, you can see voting app being created. You can see there are no tables right now, which is of course will be the case. And we have a database ready, right? It's called voting-app. So now we'll come over here and now we'll do the configuration over here. Okay. Now, when doing the configuration, you need to specify things like URL, right? So URL will specify which protocol. Okay, so I'll add the format. This is protocol. This is the DB type or the DB name. Then we need to have this kind of a syntax. We need to have the host URL. Okay, host URL over here, and then followed by the DB name. Okay, this is the format in which it accepts, okay, the URL. So your protocol is JDBC, okay. Database is MySQL, This is not a database name, but a database type. So we are making use of MySQL database. Host URL. What is the host URL? It's localhost, and the database is running by default in my system in 3306. Okay. If you want, you can check this. If you are not sure where your database is running, so you can go over here, you can close the connection tab, you can right click over here and say edit connection. So you'll see it's localhost port 3306. Okay. So you specify that DB name. We just created it. It's voting-app, something like this. Username is root. Okay. Here you need to specify your password. Okay. Whatever your password is. So I'll just add a variable over here. Password, something like this. DDL auto. Now, what should happen to your database schema when your entities change? So I'll mention over here update over here. Okay. There are different values like create, drop. So if you select drop or create, it will recreate the schema if there is any change, and you will lose all the data. So with this option, we don't lose any data. If any sort of changes are there in the entities, it just propagates to the database. Okay. Dialect. So I'll specify the dialect as org.hibernate.dialect.mysql dialect. You can see the auto suggest. So we are done, right? This is what we needed. Now let us run the application. Okay. So I need to add the DB password. So what I'll do is I'll copy this. I'll come over here. Okay. So I'll come over here, edit configuration. And here in the edit configuration, I'll add the environment variables like DB password is equal to, and I'll specify my actual password over here. Okay. Whatever your password is, you just add the password over here, hit apply, and you can say, okay. So I'll just do that. So I added the password and I'll say run. So now it's running, and let's see if we get any sort of errors as such. No errors. And you can see the application is up and running, right? So now it's able to configure the database or connect to the database. Okay. Now, if there are any issues over here, like in the connection, okay, you will get an error over here. Okay. Not here, here. Okay. You will get an error over here in the run logs. So be sure to follow the exact steps. So if you miss any sort of full stop, or if you mess up with any sort of spelling over here, you will get error. So be sure to add this as is and get the database configured. Okay. You won't see any sort of tables being created yet. So if you connect to this, you won't see any sort of tables being created over here yet. Okay. So that's something for you to keep in mind. All right. Because we don't have any sort of entities being added yet. All right. So I hope you have been able to follow this, and I hope this was useful. So now it's time that we begin setting up the entity that we need for our application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and here I'm going to create a new package. Okay, so this package is going to be model, or you can call it entity as well. Okay, so I'll have this over here. Okay, and I'll have a Java class being added. All right. Now I'll call this Java class as poll over here. Okay. And over here, I'm going to add the fields that I'm going to add. Okay, so I'm going to have fields like private long ID. Okay, I'm going to have string question over here. And yeah, so this entity needs these two. So basically a poll. So people are going to come and vote the poll, right? So a poll will have a question, which is important. It will have an ID. It is going to have options and votes as well. Okay, so every question is going to have a option, or it will have multiple options, not a single option. It is going to have multiple options that will allow users to add, right? So we'll have options as well, which will be linked to poll, and it will have votes as well, which will be linked to poll. Okay, as to which option the user is voting. So what I'm going to do is we'll need separate entities for options and votes. Okay, so we'll do that. But over here, I'll mark this as entity over here. First thing first, I'll also have a couple of Lombok annotations like data and no args constructor over here. Okay, this is done. Now over here, I'll mark this as ID over here, and I'll have a generated value over here. I'll say strategy, is identity, something like this over here. And this is it. And we need 2 more entities. Okay, so we need 2 different tables. Now, one way over here with Lombok. So Lombok has one annotation which can allow us to create a separate table without creating separate entity. Okay, so what I will do here is I'll have a list. Okay, so I can say private, I can say a list, I can say string, and I can have string as option. Okay, options. So this is one field that I want. Okay, and over here I'm going to say is equal to new array list. Okay, something like this. Okay, so this is one field that I wish to have. Okay, this is one thing, and what I will do is I'll mark this thing as an annotation. I'll say element collection. You can see it's coming in from Jakarta persistent. Okay, so this is not coming in from Lombok. I'm sorry about that. Element collection is a Jakarta, like JPA annotation. Okay, Jakarta persistent API. So that is what I'm making use of over here. Okay, so what is element collection? What it does is basically wherever you are using element collection, JPA will create a separate table. Okay, so let's say if we are making use of JPA collection for this particular field over here. So what it's going to do is it is going to take ID from this entity and it is going to take options over here and it is going to create a separate field or separate table in the database with ID and options. Okay, so instead of defining a separate entity for this, it is going to be managed by this one annotation. Okay, I hope this is absolutely making sense to you all. Okay, I'll also show you the database structure once this is done. So I'll come over here and I'll add one more thing over here. So we need to store votes as well, right? So I'll come over here, I'll add votes, and then over here I'll say votes, something like this. Options and votes. Okay, so what will happen is there will be now multiple tables over here that will be created. So first is the poll table. Okay, what is poll table going to do? This table is going to store the basic information about each poll, like ID and question. Okay, then it's going to create another table over here which is poll underscore options. Okay, we'll see what it names, but in my opinion it will be poll underscore options. So that is the table name and it will have things like poll or ID, poll options. Okay, so it will have ID and options over here. And then the third table will be poll votes, which will have the poll ID and the votes. Okay, now let us run this and let us see what happens. Okay, we have added everything literally over here. So now it's prompting me that you need to enable annotation processing. I'll enable this. Okay, because you'll get errors if you don't enable annotation processing. Okay, and if for some reason you don't get that pop-up and if you get errors for Lombok, okay, so what you can do is you can go over here to file, you can go to settings. So there is settings somewhere over here. So in Mac you'll find preferences. This settings is called preferences. So just go over here and over here you can see annotations. Okay, one second, annotations. Okay, and you'll see somewhere over here. Okay, annotations processing. You can see this under compiler. So under build, execute and deploy, under compiler, annotation processing over here. Okay, here is where you can see enable annotation processing. So you need to enable this for annotations to work, the Lombok annotation. So that is something you need to do. Now the application is up and running. You can see. Now if we come over to our database, okay, you can see like we had one table. Okay, I'll refresh this. Let me hit refresh. Now you can see there are tables created and you can see the tables. Okay, you can see poll table. I'll just click on this icon. This is the poll table which has ID and question. There is another table called poll ID and options, and there is another table called poll ID and votes. Okay, so this is one annotation that allows us to create a separate table in the database without creating a separate entity. Normally what happens is if the number of entities you have over here are converted into tables, but if you don't want to do that and if the table that you need is pretty simple, right, so in that case you can make use of element collection over here. So you can see this how it works, and the setup for entity is done. Okay, we just need one entity and we have the job done. So I hope you have been able to follow along and I hope this was useful. So now it's time that we begin working on the functionality, wherein we'll create a functionality which will help us to create polls in our application. So what I'm going to do is we are going to need a controller first. Okay, so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to new Java class. I'm going to say controllers. I'll say dot, and I'll add the controller name as poll controller, something like this. Okay, so this is being added, and it got added in the package called sub-package called controllers. Okay, I'll just hide this for a while. Okay, now over here we have the controller. I'll mark this as REST controller. First thing first, I'll also have a request mapping annotation, and I'll map this entire controller or all the endpoints that I define in the controller to this particular endpoint app API/polls. Okay, done. Oops. Now what I'm going to do is over here I'm going to have a post mapping. Okay, and I'm going to say public, and I'll say poll, and I'll say create poll. Okay, so it is going to return a poll object after the poll is created, and in the request body I'll accept poll straight away. Okay, so all the details that are needed by this entity, I'm going to accept that. Okay, and over here I'll say return poll service, which does not exist. Okay, I'm going to get a red mark, and I'll say create poll. So service is something that we need over here, service layer, which will help us create the poll that is required. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a poll service. So here I'm going to come in, I'm going to say new Java class services dot poll service, something like this. Okay, and now over here I'm going to mark this as service first. Okay, first thing first, service, and over here for poll controller. Okay, so I need to auto wire the service over here, or I'll say auto wired, or you can even without auto wiring you can say poll service. Okay, so I'll say private poll service. Okay, and I'll say poll service over here, and I'll add a constructor over here. You can see this constructor. Okay, so this is going to automatically inject the service. Okay, since it's a Spring managed component now. Okay, because we have annotated it with service annotation. And now we need create poll. So I'll say create method create poll over here. Okay, and now what we will do is here within service we'll say return. I'll say poll repository. Okay, so poll repository does not exist yet, so hang in there. Okay, I'll pass in poll over here. Okay, so poll repository is going to be our interface to the database, and we have not created poll repository yet. So I'll come over here. I'll create a new Java class, something like this over here. I'll say new Java class. I'll say repositories dot poll repository, something like this. So it's added into the repositories package. Okay, and over here what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this, or I'm going to extend over here, extends JPA repository, something like this. And here I'm going to say poll comma long, something like this. So this is done. Okay, okay, it should not be a class, it should be an interface. That's why we are seeing the red mark. Okay, so this is done. Now if you come over here, this is not yet defined. So what I'll do is I'll say over here private poll repository. Okay, and I'll say poll repository. Okay, and I'll add a constructor parameter. So I'll hover on this, I'll say add a constructor parameter, so it will get automatically injected over here, and we are all set. Okay, so we can make it final as well, but I choose not to do that. You can do that, or we'll just do that, so this warning disappears at least. Okay, so I'll come over here. This is also needed to be final. This is also needed to be final maybe, or this is final already. Okay, so yeah, this is done. Okay, now the controller is set up. Let us test this and we can see how this will work. Okay, so what I will do is I'll run the application. Let us watch for any sort of errors over here. Okay. So no errors. Oh, so we get one error. Interesting. Poll service needs a bean of poll repository which could not be found. All right. So what's the problem here? So this is not being marked as a Spring managed component right now. So service is being marked, you can see, with a service annotation. We need to mark this as the repository annotation, and I believe the error will go away. There are no issues as such. All right. So it should work. Yep, it's working. Oops. So what's the problem now? The bean is defined. One second. So I understood the problem. The problem is the repository over here. So this repository is actually located outside the tree over here. That's the problem. So everything that you see, voting app .controllers, .model, .services, but this is outside. So I'll just drag it and just bring it to this, under this package, com.votingapp, com.voting.votingapp.repositories. So let me see how this goes. You can see now it's under this and it's been refactored now. Let me rerun and see. Okay, so normally what happens is if it's outside the tree, then you need to add one more annotation like component scan and mention that, hey, Spring Boot needs to scan this package as well. Okay, of course we don't want to do that, but because I was actually supposed to create it under the tree and accidentally I created it outside. Okay, so now everything is under this com.voting.app and the application is running, as you can see. Okay, now what we are going to do is we'll come to Postman and we'll test the endpoint. So now over here in Postman, what I'm going to do is I've already created a collection, new collection. You can add a new collection, and I've called this new collection as voting application. So you can add it with the help of this plus icon over here. And then you can say add a request. And over here, you can say create poll over here. Okay. And I'm going to call this as HTTP. So I'll enter the URL. I'll say HTTPS and I'll say localhost :8080 /API/poll over here. And then I'll mark this as post request. And of course, if you take a look over here, okay, if you go to post poll controller, the request body is the entire poll over here. Okay, so we need this poll object as the request body. So what I'm going to do is here, if you come, I'm going to add a body and I'll say raw over here, JSON, and I'll paste a JSON which I have. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I have a question. Okay, you can see you have a question. So ID is of course auto generated. Okay, I'll just collapse this. ID is auto generated. You need question, you need options, and you need votes, right? So I'm saying question is what is your favorite programming language? Option is this is a list of option, and these are the initial set of votes. Okay, right? I hope this is making sense, right? Question, list of string, and then list of long, which is votes, right? So this is what we are passing here, and I don't think anything else is needed. Let me check the endpoint if it's correct. Okay, poll controller. We are saying API/polls. Let me see. API/polls, which is absolutely okay. So it's polls and not poll. I'm going to save this. Let me trigger this request. Okay. So I triggered this request. Okay, it says could not get a response. All right. So let me try again with HTTP over here. I'll just send HTTP. Okay, and it worked. So HTTPS was the problem. Okay, we don't have SSL enabled yet, so we'll have HTTP. Okay, so I'll save this, and you can see the poll being created. What is your favorite programming language? The options are these, and these are the votes. Okay, let us see in the database. Okay, let us also check the console. So there's nothing on the console, you can see. Okay, let us also check the database. So here I'll refresh this. Okay, so poll. I'll run this. You can see what is your favorite programming language, right? This is a question that has been added in the poll. Poll options, let us say. Poll options are Java, Python, JavaScript, and C++. And these are all for poll ID 1. What is poll ID 1? It's this one, right? Poll votes. Let me run this. You'll see for poll ID 1, the votes are 0 for all the options, right? So yeah, this is it. And I think we are able to basically have the data being saved into the database, and the entire poll information is being saved, okay, with the help of MySQL and JPA. So I hope this is useful, and I hope you have been able to follow along. So if you take a look at the schema right now, I realize one thing, that the poll, so we have poll options, and then we have poll votes. So poll votes are associated with poll ID and not the poll options, right? So we need poll votes to be associated with the vote like option as well, right? Because we should know which option has got how many votes. So that is something that we are missing over here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of refactoring in our code, and I'm going to modify things a little bit, okay? So what we are going to do, I'll come over here to our application here. Now here, if you head over to poll.java, here we have options and we have votes, okay? So what we can do is we can store votes with option. That is something that we can do, okay? Because we need to have a link of options with votes as well, okay? We should not separate votes is what I think. So what I would be doing is I would be refactoring this a bit, and I would be actually introducing one more entity over here, okay? And that entity can be, so here I'll come to models, I'll say new Java class, I'll say option vote over here, something like this, okay? And I'll add this to repository, like the git repo, and over here I'll say over here private, okay, string option, okay, and I'll say private long vote count, something like this, okay, and I'll say 0L, okay. So this is the default value for this, okay. And what we can do is we can have some getters and setters. So first I'll mark this as data over here. I'll have no args constructor as well, okay. So this is done, okay. Now what I will do is here, if you come to poll.java, okay, we can get rid of this one, okay. We don't need this, and instead of this, so I'll get rid of this one, or I'll just comment it for now, okay, so that we know what changes we are making. Over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, instead of string, this can be option vote, okay. So along with options, we are also storing option vote now, okay, and this is element collection, and this, since this is a separate entity, we can mark this as embeddable, okay, because this has to be embedded over here, right? So I'll run this, okay, but I'm sure that we will see a few errors because we've made changes to our model, all right. And let us see how this works. Okay, we saw something breaking over here, okay, of course. And if you scroll up, let me like go to the controller and the service over here. So I'm getting this error, okay, DDL error, where it's not able to alter because we have altered the schema, right? So it's not able to alter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to like clean the database. So instead of update over here, I'm going to say, or what you can do is I'll recreate the database. So I'll copy this voting app over here. I'll head over to our schema, okay, and I'll get rid of all the tables, okay. So you can delete the entire schema and recreate it, okay, or you can drop the table as well. So I'll just drop the tables, drop now, okay. You can drop the table, drop now. I'll drop poll, drop the table, drop now, okay. This is done. Now what I will do is I'll restart the application. So I'll stop it. Let me restart. Let us see how this works. Okay, we still get an error. So we are getting an error because I believe because of this option over here. Okay, this might be a reserved word when it comes to SQL. So what I will do is I'll just rename this. Okay, I'll say vote option over here, and let us like try recreating it. Okay, so here let me refresh. Let us see how. Okay, we have poll. So let us have. I won't truncate this. Okay, let me rerun. Okay, so let me rerun this. I've renamed the column over here as vote option. Okay, this should work now. Okay, no errors now. Okay, so clearly this was an issue, having option as a column name. Okay, so to keep this in mind, this is a learning. Okay, if you have something that works in Java, okay, but remember this column name is going to be translated into SQL queries behind the scenes. Okay, so if it's a reserved word in SQL, you will get errors. All right, so it started and it's working fine. The application is started. You can see poll options. So yeah, we have reduced the tables from 3 tables to like 2 tables. So here you can see ID and question, and here you can see poll ID, vote, and vote option. So this is a better structure I feel going forward. Okay, because in future, like if there are too many votes on a particular option, we now know that which option will have that particular vote. Okay, so it's a good schema is what I feel like, and there are no errors in the application. Okay, because we don't have much code. We have just controller, we have service over here. Okay, but now the thing is we need to like refactor the postman queries. Okay, so here the postman request, I would say. Okay, so here we were passing in the post request. You can see how we were passing in over here. We were saying options, and along with options we had Java, Python. So options were separate, votes were separate. There was no linkage early on, right? Now we have a linkage. So what we have to do is I will take this to a new line, and this also will go to a new line. This also will go to a new line, and this also will go to a new line. Votes won't exist because this is not valid now. Okay, oops. And this will come into a new line, and this each thing is an object now. Okay, so Java. So I'll just cut this Java. Okay, and I'll have option over here. Okay, something like this. I'll say option. Okay, and over here colon Java. Okay, and I'll have comma. I'll have vote count, and I'll say colon, and I'll say 0. Okay, so this is how it's going to be created. Okay, so this won't be a vote option. We renamed this to, this won't be option, it would be vote option, right? Because we renamed this. Okay, so this is how it's going to be. I'll copy this. Okay, now for Python we are going to replicate this. Okay, so over here I'll come here and I'll say Python. I'll cut this to Python. Okay, I'll replicate this. So actually I'll replicate this thrice. Okay, so 1 and 2. Okay, so this is for JavaScript. This is replicated for JavaScript. Oops, JavaScript will be second. We need this for C++. Okay, so C++ I can type in C++, and I'll get rid of the rest over here. Okay, this is it. I guess we are all set. So this is an array options, and we have this is closing over here. Everything, these are individual objects over here. What is your favorite programming language? And yeah, let us send this and let us see how this works. So I'll trigger this request. You can see it is created now, and if you come over here, let us see the polls table first. So I'll run this request. You can see the polls table. What is your favorite programming language? Fair enough. Poll options. Let us see the poll options. You can see poll ID 1, vote count, and Java. Right now, whatever vote you send in, okay, they are associated with the option. Right. So yeah, we have been able to refactor successfully, and I hope you love this refactoring exercise. Okay, you cannot, like, if you're building softwares, there will be iteration, and yes, there will be iterations is what I want to highlight over here. Okay, I have not cut this part, or I have not deleted this part. I could have edited it. Okay, but you know, refactoring, learning about refactoring, how you can refactor the code always helps. Okay, so I choose to have this as the part of the course, because you know, not everyone gets it right at the first attempt, and it's important that you understand this and you learn how you can refactor your own code and get things working to normal. I hope this was useful and I hope you loved this. Hey there. So now it's time that we begin talking about the next API. So we have the create poll endpoint, which is helping us create a poll in the application and inside the database, I should say. We also need to be able to fetch all the polls in our application. So that is going to be pretty simple and straightforward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a method over here. So I'm going to call public list of poll over here. And I'm going to say get all polls, okay, over here, something like this. And I need to import list, okay, that is something that I've not done. So make sure so there will be a lot of lists. You need to select this first one. We are seeing 3 lists over here. You need to select the one from java.util. We did that, and we need to return poll service dot get all polls. So we will have a similar method get all polls with a similar name like we are having over here in the controller inside the service as well. All right. And I'll mark this as get mapping because this is a get request. All right. So this is going to be our method. Okay. And we need to create this particular method inside the service. So I'll just go ahead and create it. Okay. We don't have any sort of implementation over here yet. Okay. We need to implement things. So we are going to make use of repository. Okay, so I'm going to say return poll repository dot find all over here. Okay, and that is it. I think we are done. This should give us the list of all the polls that exist in the database. Let us run this and let us see if we are able to do so. So application is started without any errors. If you come over here, okay, we have, let us see how many polls we have. We have 1 poll, right? So what I'm going to do is, let us see if we are able to get that poll. I'll just duplicate this request, first of all. Okay, and over here, I'll say get all polls, something like this. Okay, and over here, I'll turn this to get, and okay, this should be none over here. Okay. And that is it. I'll just say send over here and we should see a list of, so we are seeing 1 poll right now. You can see what is your favorite programming language. Okay, you can see, and you can also ask 1 more poll over here. Okay, so I'll say which programming language would you like to learn, something like this. Okay, so this is our next question, and I can say Java, okay, Go, JavaScript. Instead of JavaScript, I can say React, okay. Instead of Java, I can say over here Rust over here, for example. Instead of C++, let me change the option to C. Okay, so I've just changed the few options over here, or all the options I've changed, okay. And I'll just hit create. So this will create the poll, okay. Now, if you come to the database, there should be 2 polls. You can see 2 polls over here, okay. And if you see poll options over here, if I run this, you're going to see these are for poll ID 1, these are for poll ID 2, right? Now, if you come over here, okay, if I go to get all polls, and if you get this ID 1, okay, you can see this is an array first of all, okay, and this is ID 1, okay, until here, this is ID 2 until here. Okay, so yeah, this is how we can implement the functionality to get all the polls. So I hope you have been able to follow along. Now it's time that we'll begin creating the endpoint that will help us get a particular poll by its ID. All right. So here in the poll controller, what I will do is we are going to be needing a get mapping itself, except the fact that that particular get mapping is going to accept a parameter called ID. Okay. So what we can do is we can actually replicate this endpoint over here. So I'll just make a copy of this over here. okay, instead of get all polls, I'll say get poll over here, something like this. And instead of a list, I'll return just a poll over here. And I can wrap this up in the response entity, in fact. So I'll just do control set. Okay, and instead of list, I can have response entity. Okay, like this. Okay, this is done. I have a get mapping. Now inside the get mapping here, what I need is I would need its ID, right? So I would say over here slash and ID as the path variable. Okay, and if I'm mentioning ID over here, what I can do is I can say path variable over here, and I can say long ID, something like this. Okay, now this is done. Now here what I can do is I can actually, instead of getting all the polls, I can say get poll by ID over here. Okay, and I can pass in the ID. Okay, so this is the method that we are going to need to create. Okay, now this method can return optional. Okay, we have not created the method, so let us define this method over here. Okay, so it's returning response entity poll. Okay, it won't return response entity, will have optional type. Okay, over here the input will be same or long ID. Okay, now over here instead of returning a null, what I will do is I will say poll repository dot find by ID. Okay, now there is a reason why we are returning optional. Okay, because find by ID itself returns an optional. So you can see it returns optional. Okay, now with the help of optional, what we are going to do is we are going to actually make use of map over here. Okay, I'm going to say map, something like this. I'll say response entity dot okay. Instead I'll remove this and I'll say okay over here, something like this. Okay, so what I'm doing is if the poll is found or the poll is present, then I'm returning response okay. All right, and if it's not present, then I'm saying or else. Okay, I'm saying or else over here, and I'm going to say response entity dot not found. Okay, dot build. Okay, so this should do the job. All right, so here we are getting the poll by ID. If the poll is found, we are mapping it essentially to the okay response. Okay, and we are returning the poll over here. Okay, whatever poll we are getting as the output. And if it's not found, then what we are doing is we are saying response entity, oops, it says no content. Okay, so instead of that, I'll make use of not found, like so. Okay, so if the poll ID is not found or if poll ID is not present, we say not found over here. Let us test this. Okay, let me run this. Ideally, it should work without any issues, and you can see the application is up and running. Okay, I'll just save this and I'll duplicate this. Okay, I'll say get poll by ID over here, and over here I'm going to so here if you see polls slash, I'm going to add the ID. So we need to add the ID over here. So I can say 1. Okay, and let us trigger this request. You can see this is the poll with ID 1, right? If I say ID 2, it is going to give me the next one, which programming language you would like to learn. Okay, would you like to learn? And if I say 3, there is no poll with ID 3. So we are going to get 404 not found. That is how it works. Okay, so you can see this API is working absolutely okay without any issues. So this endpoint is working as expected. So I hope you have been able to follow along, and I hope this was super useful. So now it's time that we will implement the voting functionality. Now, whenever a user wants to vote for a particular option in the poll, he can do so. And we'll be calling this particular API whenever this has to happen. All right. So what we will do is, how will this functionality work is, first of all, it is going to be a post request. Okay. Now it is going to be a post request because we are going to have a request body over here, and we are going to have the vote object. Okay, so we are going to have a vote object, and we will create a class that will represent a vote. Okay, and then this particular information will be passed on to the service. Okay, so it will go to service. This is what we are going to do. Okay, so let us begin implementing this. So I'm going to say public void vote. I'm keeping the method name as simple vote. I'm going to add a request body, and I'm going to say vote. Okay. Now this vote class does not exist yet. That's absolutely okay. We are seeing a red mark, so we'll have some patience, and we'll get this resolved. Okay. Now over here, I'm going to say return. We'll get another red mark over here. I'm going to make use of poll service dot vote. Okay. And I'm going to say vote dot get poll ID. So this is something that we are going to create. Okay, it does not exist yet. Okay, and I'm going to say vote dot get option index. Okay, so these method does not exist yet. Okay, but I'm telling you what I'm doing over here. So we are creating a method vote inside poll service, and we are passing in the poll ID and the option index. So the poll ID against which the vote is to be conducted, and the option index. Okay, so out of all the four or five option or whatever number of options there are, which index is supposed to be voted? That is something that we are going to implement. Okay, I'm going to say post mapping over here, and I'm going to say /vote, something like this. All right, so this is what we are going to do. Now what I will do first is I will create this class called vote. Okay, so let us create this class. So what I will do over here is I will create this class here. Okay, or let me check controllers. We have model. Okay, now this is neither a controller nor a model. This is sort of a request or a request object, I should say, right over here. So what I will do is I'll say new, and or let me create it from here. Okay, no, it won't create from here. So I'll come over here. I'll say new Java class. I'll say TTO or request dot vote, something like this. All right, I'll add it to the version control, and over here I'm going to have private. Okay, long poll ID, and I'll say private int option index, and then I'm going to add data over here. Okay, so data will make sure we have some getters, setters, and even we have no args constructor, something like this. Okay, so this is done. All right, and now if you come over here, I'm going to import vote. Okay, so this is the vote, and once I import vote, you'll see I have a get poll ID. Okay, just correct the method name if you are seeing red mark over here, but basically what we are doing is we are getting the poll ID over here. So this is vote. Now vote is having two things, poll ID and option index. Okay, so in the request we need to have this object which is having these two pieces of information. Okay, now this is done. Okay, now I'll get rid of this comment over here. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to create a vote method in poll service. Okay, now I'll just create it from here. Okay, so this is created. Okay, what should it return? Okay, so it's okay if it does not return anything. All right, and the parameters are also fine. Okay, now we need to implement the method. Now how are we going to implement? So we have access to poll ID, we have access to the index from the options. Okay, so first thing what we need to do is we will get the poll object, get poll from DB. Okay, DB is database, so we'll get the poll object like the entire poll from the database. Okay, then we are going to get all the options, get options, right? And over here I'll get the option that the user has selected. Okay, or the user is willing to vote based on the index. Okay, and then I'll increment the vote against that particular option. Okay, so I'll get the option over here. Okay, why are we getting the option? I'll also tell you that. So here, because an option, like every option is represented this way, right? You can see every option is represented this way. So you have a poll over here. You have, so this is our poll entity, right? This is where things start. So if you go to the model over here, the model, okay, let me expand this. If you go to model over here, okay, you have two things. One is poll. Now this is poll. Poll has ID and the question, right? Now where are the options? Options are over here, okay? And how is an option being represented? So an option is being represented using the option name over here and the vote count. So vote option is nothing but the option name, right? I'll just switch over to the database also to make this clear. So this is a option. This is a poll, right? And these are the options. Now how are options being represented? With the help of vote count and vote option. Now what is vote option? Vote option is nothing but the option that is being presented to the user, okay? Poll ID is there, of course, for the foreign key purposes, which is fine over here. So this is what is representing a option in any poll. So if a poll is having 4 options, let's say, okay. So if you come over here, if you get all the polls, if a poll is having 4 options over here, this poll is having 4 options. Let me expand this, okay. So if this poll is having 4 options, it means this is, so this is one object of option vote. You can see this is another object of option vote. This is third object and this is fourth object. So there are 4 objects of option vote over here. Okay. And they are being stored as 4 records in a separate table and they are being linked to this particular poll in the database. Okay. I hope this is clear to you all. All right. So this is one option which is being represented along with the vote, right? Now what we need to do is over here, not in the controller, but in the service, okay? We need to get the option over here. We're getting the option. Then we need to so we are getting all the options first. So I'll say get all options. Then we need to get the option selected. Okay, we need to get selected option. Okay, and then we need to increment the vote count of the selected option. Okay, increment vote for selected option, something like this. This is what we need to do over here. Okay, this is the entire process and we can add a step of validation over here. So for example, if the index is not valid over here, okay, I can say if index for vote is not valid, show error, okay, or throw error, something like that. Okay, so I'll throw an error. All right, so the first thing, we have poll ID and the index that the user wants to vote. Okay, we get the entire poll object from the database. All right, and then we are getting all the options only. All right, once we have the list of options, so this is going to give us a list. Okay, how are we going to get this? So we'll say get the entire poll object. So this entire poll object is going to come, and then from there we are going to get the list. These are all the lists along with the vote count is what we are going to get, right? And then if the index for our vote is not valid, right, we'll throw an error. This is a validation step. And then out of all the list, we are going to get the selected option. And then we are going to increment the vote for the selected option. That is how things are going to work, right? And then we'll save with the update. Save incremented vote option into the database, something like this. Okay, so the incremented vote option is, or incremented option, I should say, incremented option is saved into the database, right? Along with the new vote, of course. Okay, so this is the entire process that we are going to do. I hope this is sounding clear. These are the steps that I thought of writing in as comments so that people know what I'm trying to do. Now we are going to write code for each step. Okay, this is going to be easy to understand if you understand the steps. Okay, so I'm going to say poll over here. We are first getting the poll. How are we going to get the poll? Poll repository dot find by ID. I'm going to say, okay, find by ID. Okay, I'm going to say poll ID. All right, dot or else throw, something like this. Okay, and over here I'm going to say new runtime exception. Okay, and I'll say poll not found, something like this. Okay, So we are getting the poll first, poll repository. Okay, we are making use of poll repository. We are trying to get the poll by ID, and it is returning an optional, right? You can see. So I've added a else throw over here, and I'm throwing a runtime exception over here. That poll is not found. This is done. First step achieved. Okay. Let us take a look at the second step. Okay, we are going to get the list of all the options. How are the options represented? They're represented using this particular entity class, option vote. Okay. So we are going to say, and of course the return is going to be in the form of list because we are getting all the options. So I'm going to say poll dot get options. Okay. Like so. And I'm going to get this into a list. Okay. So I'm going to say list of, I'm going to say options, option vote, like so. And over here, I'm going to say options. Okay. And I'm going to assign it over here. So we are getting the list of option vote over here. Now, what is option vote going to have? This list is going to have the vote name, like the option name and the vote count for every vote, right? So we have these two pieces of information. Oops. So now after this, what I'm going to do is I'll add this validation. Okay. We can say if option index is less than 0. Okay. Or option index is greater than equal to options dot size. Okay. So we can say options dot size, something like this. Okay. Then I'm going to say throw. I'm throwing an exception, new illegal argument exception. Okay, and I can say invalid option index. I hope this is making sense, right? This is done. And now what we need to do is here we'll get the selected option. So what we need to do is I'll say option vote, option vote. I'll say selected option, and I'll say options dot get, and I'll say option index, like so. Okay. And then we are going to increment the vote for selected option. So we are getting the selected option. We need to increment the vote for selected option. So I'm going to say selected option dot set vote count, and I'm going to say selected option dot get vote count. Okay. And then I'm going to increment this by 1. Okay, something like this. So I'm getting the current vote count and I'm incrementing it by 1 and I'm setting it as the new vote count. I'm just incrementing, right? And then I'm going to say poll repository dot save, and I'm going to say poll, like so. Okay, this is done. I think we are all set over here. Okay, we are returning this. We should not return. That is why we are getting an error, because the return type is void over here. I think this is all set. Let us see if we are able to get this to work. Okay, so we are able to run this without any issues. Okay, we'll now call this particular endpoint /vote with the post mapping. Okay, so I'll just duplicate this because there's a post request, right? And I'll call this as vote API polls /vote over here, right? And in the body we need to pass in. So I'll get rid of all of this first of all. Okay, we don't need this. And here I'm going to say poll ID over here and then options index. Okay, so here we have poll ID. Okay, and then we have options index. Okay, so poll ID. Now, which poll ID do we want to conduct vote on? So poll ID 1, and I'll pass in option index as 1. Okay, I'll just format this something like this. All right. And I'll say send. Now this is sent. We have the request successful, okay, which is 200. Okay. Now if we go to the database, okay, so we have voted for the first option in poll ID 1. Now if I refresh this, you are going to see over here, you can see Python is being voted over here, right? So yeah, the vote is being incremented now, and whichever thing you vote for, okay, that is going to be recorded. right? So I hope this is making sense and I hope this is useful. So this endpoint is working absolutely okay and the votes are being recorded. You can vote for anything. Okay, I can conduct 3 votes. Okay, and if you run this, okay, you can see 3 votes against Python, right? So I hope this is useful and I hope you have been able to follow along. So it's time that we begin with our Angular project, and of course for running and creating Angular project, we're going to need Angular onto our system. Okay, so this is the official website of Angular, which is angular.dev. All right, and you can see there is this latest version available right now. Okay, there are new version every now and then, and don't worry if there's a new version after this, because everything will work as is, but if there are any changes, I'll make sure I update the videos. All right. So here this is the Angular website. You can just search for Angular, and this is the website that you'll see. So this is the official website. You can go through and read more about Angular. Okay, you can click over here, learn Angular, and here you have the documentation, like you can see on the left hand side, docs. So you can even go to the docs from the left hand side, okay, right from this page. Okay, so if you come over here, okay, you will see the link to installation. So first thing we need to make sure is that we have the right tools. Okay, we have things to run Angular. So here, if you come in, okay, so there are a set of prerequisites that we need to understand. You can see, okay, first prerequisite is Node.js. Okay, so we need Node.js as the #1 prerequisite. And if you click over here, they have given a link over here as well. Okay, this is the link to the versions. Okay, the versions of Node.js that is supposed to be there. Okay, so you can refer to this link. Okay, now to install Node.js, you can just search for Node.js, and this is the official website, nodejs.org. Okay, and from here you can download Node.js for your operating system. Now I'm on Windows, so it's showing me the link for Windows, but you can like switch over here. You can change the version for whichever operating system you want. Okay, and you can get it onto your system. All right, so the installation is pretty much straightforward. You can install it via package manager, pre-built installer. Okay, binaries. You can even get the source code. Okay, so it's totally up to you as to how you want to go ahead. Okay, and install it. Now along with Node.js, you will also get a Node.js or Node Package Manager, NPM. Okay, that is what we are going to need to run the commands over here, right? So this is #1 prerequisite. Be sure to have this onto your system. #2 is the text editor. Now, of course, when you're writing code, you need an IDE for like auto-suggest, running the application, syntax highlighting, a lot of stuff, right? And you can see here the recommendation over here is Visual Studio Code. So you can click over here. You'll be taken to visualstudiocode.com. I have this website also open in another tab. But you can head over here to this website. You can even search for Visual Studio Code on Google and you will come over here. Now, this is the IDE. This is how it looks. You can download it for Windows. You also have options for other platforms. So if I click on other platforms, you can see for Linux, for Mac OS, depending on the kind of Mac OS chip, like the Intel chip or the Apple Silicon chip you have, you can get it installed. All right. So this is what we will need over here. And the other thing we need is a terminal. Now, any terminal, like inbuilt terminal on your operating system will also work. Okay, so these are the 3 prerequisites. Okay. Now, before installing Angular CLI, so we are going to need the Angular CLI, which is the Angular command line tool. Okay, to run all the commands related to Angular. Okay, and this is how the installation for Angular works. You can see it's being installed via Node Package Manager, npm install -g Angular CLI. Okay, so first thing we need npm. So after installing Node.js, we need to make sure that it's properly installed. So what we will do is open any terminal on your local machine. Okay, and you can say node -v. So you can see this is the version of Node installed. Okay, this is a little bit dated. Okay, because I installed it some time back, but I'm not going to update it because it's going to work. There's no issue as such. You can even check the version using npm version, like node package manager version, using this command. Okay, so since I'm getting the output for both of these, it's clear that it's installed. All right, now what we need to do is, here you need to install the Angular CLI. Now what is Angular CLI? It is going to be useful to run Angular commands. Okay, so I'm going to copy this code. What we are doing over here essentially is we are saying npm install. This is the node package manager command. We are saying -g, which means globally. So install Angular CLI globally. That is what this means. Okay, so it's installing globally on our local machine. So I'm going to paste this and I'm going to press enter. Okay, so this is going to do a little bit of processing, and depending on your internet connection speed and your system, it will install and add the requested package. Okay, so it's now added, and now over here I've installed Angular. Okay, then what we can do is we need to check the we need to verify the installation, right? So we need to check the version. So I can say ng version. Okay, you can see the Angular version being installed. This is the version of Angular that we have on our system. Now, one thing I would like to highlight, before installing Angular, be sure to check if there is Angular installed onto your system. Okay, by running this command, and then run the installation command. Okay, so be sure to do that. Okay, and after installing, you should see the Angular CLI over here, CLI version, the node version over here, npm version, and the OS over here. Okay, so all the details over here is what you're seeing, right? You can see core, architect, semantics, you can see everything over here. Okay, so the Angular version is set and we have everything done over here. What we can also do is we need to create a new project. So this is the command basically to create a new project. So you can simply say ng new and you can specify the project name. So ng is the command to work with Angular. Okay, and then you should get this kind of an output over here. Okay, and it will also initialize it to get. Okay, and then you can change over to the Angular application directory, and then you can start the application, and you should see the application running like this. Okay, so these are the basic steps that you can follow over here. Okay, so what we are going to do is we can create an application. So I'll just copy this. Okay, ng new, and before running this command, be sure to navigate to the directory where you want to create a project. Okay, so this is the directory where I have navigated on my local machine. Okay, and this is where I also have the backend for the application. Okay, so I would recommend having backend and front end both in the same folder so that it's easy for you to find out, right, in future. So I have this folder. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I am going to paste this command. Oops. So voting app got copied. Okay, so just in case you're not aware of how you can navigate directories, you can make use of cd command and you can navigate to any directory of your choice. Okay, so that's it, and I'll copy this command over here. I'll paste it over here, ng new, and I'm going to specify the project name over here. So I'm going to say pole-app over here. Okay, so yeah, this is what it is, and if I press enter, the project will be created. Now what I'm going to do is, instead of pressing enter, I'm going to add a few more options along with this command, which we are allowed to do, of course. And a way to add option is you can add 2 dash over here like this, 2 hyphens, and you can specify whatever option you want to use. Now options are a way to mention, okay, what sort of additional requirements you have apart from a standard app creation. Okay, so I'll explain what I mean. So we need to specify 3 things in option. Okay, one is we need to create a standalone, we need to make use of standalone components, right? So we will specify that option over here because we'll be making use of standalone components. We'll be making use of routing as well. Okay, so we'll specify that option as well so that we can get an app with basic routing setup, and that is going to allow us to navigate between different pages or views. And also we don't need test cases, right? We are not going to write test cases. So I'm going to specify that option over here because we don't need files for test cases to be created or test files to be created. All right. So first thing is about standalone components. So I'm going to specify 2 hyphens or 2 dash, and I'm going to say stand alone over here. Okay. So This creates standalone components to simplify our structure without relying on centralized modules. Okay, and standalone components are self-contained, meaning they don't need to be declared in a module. Okay, so this is something that we are using. We'll make use of routing over here. I'm going to add a space and I'm going to say routing. Okay, so routing means this will set up routing in our application, like I said, allowing us to navigate between different views, pages in our application. And with this option, Angular creates a file to manage routes and sets up basic configuration to help us define how users move between different sections of the app. Okay, so this is routing. Then we have skip tests. So this is going to skip the generation of test files. Now test files are represented with .spec.ts files. Okay, this is the extension. So that is going to be skipped. We won't have test files. Of course, you can skip this option. Okay, you can have test files, but not define tests. That is possible. But I just want to not have test files so that the project looks simple. Okay, so it is going to create a simple project with fewer files, and I'm going to press enter over here. Okay, now it's asking me that do you want to would you like to share some anonymous usage data about this project with the Angular team? Okay, along with respect to this privacy policy. I'll just say no. You can even say yes. That's absolutely okay. I'll say no, and here it's asking me like which style sheet format I would like to use. So I would like to use CSS. Okay, I'll select that. And do you want to enable server-side rendering? Okay, so I'll say no over here. That's it. And you can see a set of commands being executed over here and some packages being installing packages. Okay, so we'll wait for a while until this finishes. And like I said earlier, this processing depends on your internet connection speed and also how your system is. Okay, so we'll wait for a minute over here. This should end soon. Now this is done. Okay, you can see the packages being installed successfully. Okay, and you can see like some hints over here, and then you can see the Git initialization is also done. All right, so yeah, our Angular project setup is done. And what we can do is we can head over to our application. So if you do ls, okay, we have a poll app over here. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to poll app because that is what our application is. Okay, so you can see we are inside poll app now. And if you come over here, if you scroll down, okay, you can run this command npm start. So I'll just copy this, come over here and paste it over here. Oops, so I pasted it twice. Paste it over here and say enter. Okay, now what is going to happen is it is going to build this project, and you can see it built this project. Some bundle generation happened, and then you can see this is where our application is up and running. Now you can head over to this link by clicking on it, and you will see a default application up and running. You can see this is our default Angular application with some default boilerplate template over here. Okay, you can explore the docs, learn with tutorials, CLR docs, and you can see some helpful links over here. Okay, so the application is up and running, and I hope this has been useful and you have been able to follow all the steps properly. So now what we are going to do is we are going to move our project to Visual Studio Code. So I have VS Code open over here. Okay, and if you don't have VS Code open, you can head over to the official website of Visual Studio Code and follow the installation steps. It's pretty simple, straightforward, and just like any other software to get this onto your machine. Okay, now this is the welcome screen. I'm seeing some recent projects here because I use Visual Studio Code a lot. Okay, if you're not seeing this, that's absolutely okay. You might see a different welcome screen depending on if you're using or if you're a new user or not. Okay, so now what I would do is I would open my project over here. So I would go to File, I'll go to Open a Folder, and I will navigate to the folder where I have my project created. So I've navigated to the folder where my project is created. I'll select the poll app and I'll say select the folder. Okay, so it will open up this particular folder for me, okay, with the entire Angular project. Okay, And you can see over here, once you open the Angular application in Visual Studio Code, it will prompt you that do you want to install this recommended Angular language service extension. Okay, so I'll say yes, install it, and it is going to install it for me. Okay, if you don't get this recommendation, you can head over to the extensions tab over here. You can see this extensions tab, and you can search for Angular language service over here. Okay, and you can click on install. So it has installed this for me. Okay, and the installation is done. All right, now instead of running the project from the external terminal, so I was running the application from the external terminal over here by making use of ng-serve. Okay, what you can do is you can run the project from here also. Okay, so I'll go to terminal over here, new terminal, and it will open this terminal in the current directory over here. Okay, you can see pwd. Okay, and what I will do is an inbuilt terminal inside Visual Studio Code. So I'll simply say ng, and I'll say serve. Okay, now this is going to run the application. You can see ng-serve. This is also a command to serve your Angular app, and you can see it's running over here. You can like press Control and hover on this, okay, to follow the link. Or if you're on Mac, you can press long press command and hover on this, and it will get converted into a hyperlink, and then you can click on it. Okay, it did not open the browser, so you can simply copy this. Okay, oops, it stopped the server. So you can simply copy the link, or you can type it manually as well. That's absolutely okay. Okay, but you can run this ng-serve, and it should run the project. You can see it's running the project. And now once the project is running, you can hit this URL over here in the browser, and you should see this default app running. All right. So that's how you can set up Angular application in Visual Studio Code. I hope you have been able to follow along. So now it's time that we take our application forward and we start writing in some code. So this is our application in the Visual Studio Code, and what we will be doing is we will be setting up the model which will define the structure for the data that we are going to use throughout our application. And also we are going to create a service that will help us consume the APIs from the backend. All right, and we can use them in our application. So I'll expand this a bit. We'll head over to terminal, and I'll create a new instance of the terminal. So keep in mind over here, we have the server running on one instance of the terminal. If I shut this, the server is going to stop. So if I refresh this now, the server is going to stop and there is no application running. So for the application to keep on going, I have to make sure that I have this command line open, and basically the application will be live. Okay, if I shut this, it's not going to work. So what I can do is I can open multiple terminals in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to make use of this plus icon over here, and I'm going to open a new terminal over here. And what I'm going to do is I am in the current directory of the project, which is, of course, it always opens up in the root directory of the project. And what I'm going to do is I am going to generate a model over here using the Angular CLI. So I'm going to say ng generate interface. I'm going to call it poll over here, and I'm going to say type is equal to models, something like this. Okay, and I'm going to press enter. You can see the model has been created, and if you go over here, okay, you should see this particular file being added over here. Okay, so this is our model wherein we are going to define the interface basically that is going to represent the data in our application. That is how it is going to work. Okay, so one thing I like to mention over here, we are going to have two interfaces. Okay, so I'll just hide this. So one interface is the poll interface. This is the one, and this interface is going to represent a complete poll. Okay, and then we are going to have one more interface, which would be a option vote interface. So this is going to represent an individual option with a poll. Okay, so let us create that, and I'm going to make use of a single file for both of the things. If you want to create multiple models, you can create them using this command. Okay, you can run this command again with a different file name and you can create one more. Okay, but here what I'm going to do is within this poll, I'm going to have a ID which is of type number. Okay, oops, I missed a semicolon. And then I'm going to have a question with the type of string. And then I'm going to have options with the type of option vote over here. Okay, option vote is not defined yet, right? So I need to have option vote and it's going to be of type array. Okay, so what I will do is I will scroll up and I'll have option vote over here as well. Okay, so I'm going to say export interface. Okay, and I'm going to say option vote, something like this. And over here, I'm going to have option text. And I'm going to say it's a string. And here I'm going to have votes. It's going to be a number, like so. Okay, so this is done. And if you scroll down, we have option vote as well. So option vote is actually an array of options is an array of option vote. Okay, and option vote is representing the option text and the votes, right? So this is how the data is going to be represented in our application. I have two interfaces defined in a single file. Okay, you can create multiple files. You can create one more interface also, using this particular command, and you can have option vote being added over there. That's also possible, but I'm just sticking to one interface over here. Okay, now let's talk about the service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a command again. So I'm going to say ng. Okay, I'm going to say ng generate over here, and we'll need a service. So that service is going to help us consume the APIs. Okay, so I'm going to say ng generate service. I'm going to call this poll, and I don't need test cases. So what will happen is whenever we run without this option, so if we run this command, it is going to create two files. One is a service file where we will write the code, and another file where you can write the test cases. So I'm not going to do that. I don't need test cases. So I'm going to say skip tests, something like this. Okay, and let's press enter and see what happens. You can see the service file is actually created over here. You can see this is the service file. Okay, so this is where we are going to write in all the code. Okay, and this service will handle the HTTP request for polls, allowing the app to interact with the backend API. And here it is going to make use of HTTP client, Angular's HTTP client service, I should say. Okay, to send the request. Okay, and let me minimize this for now. Okay, I'll take it over here. All right, I'll zoom out a bit. Okay, and we'll start writing in the code over here. Okay, so yeah, it's our service. So what we'll do is we have this injectable, which is fine. We have poll service over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to immediately have a base URL. So I'm going to say base URL over here, and here I'm going to have HTTP. So this is going to be the URL for the application. So we can get the URL actually from the Postman also. Okay, this is the URL. So I can copy this URL. I'll come over here. You can type it out as well. Okay, as long as you are confident that you will type in correctly. Okay, so this is a base URL. Oops. So this is the base URL, right? So this is something that I've added. Okay. Now in the constructor, I'll add a private. Okay. I'll say HTTP, and this is of type HTTP client. Okay, this is the one. Okay, so you can see the import being added over here at the top. So this is what we are going to make use of. Okay, so that's the constructor. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a few methods. So one method is going to be to create the poll. We have another method to get the poll, and then we have one method to vote to a particular option. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll say create poll over here. Okay, something like this. I'm going to have poll. Okay, and this is going to be of type poll over here. Okay, so the moment I typed in poll, you can see this got imported, poll from poll.models. Okay, and now I'm going to add a colon observable and I'm going to say this is poll over here, and then I'm going to return this dot http dot post. Okay, and then I'm going to have poll over here, and then I'm going to say this dot base URL dot, not dot, post, something, oh sorry, poll. We need to pass in the poll object. Okay, so this is nothing but the create poll functionality. Okay, where what we are doing is we are actually taking a poll object as the parameter. So here if you see, we are taking the poll object as the parameter within this method. Okay, and we are sending a post request to the backend to create a new poll. Okay, so this particular line over here is doing the job of sending a post request to the backend, or to the base URL, you can say, with the poll data in the body. Here is the poll data. Okay, and this is going to create a new poll in the backend, and this method returns an observable poll over here. Okay, which emits the created poll data when the request is completed. Okay, so this is something that we are going to use in our application. Okay, so this is done. This is about poll, like creating poll, I should say. We have get polls as well. Okay, so I have get polls, and then I'm going to say observable, and I'm going to say this is going to be a poll and array, something like this. Okay, so it's a poll of type, so it's an array of type poll. Okay, that is how it is. And then over here I'm going to say return this dot http dot get, and then I can say poll over here. Okay, so that is what it's going to return, and I'm going to say this dot base URL over here. Okay, so this is how we are fetching the poll from the backend. Okay, so it is going to return the poll of type array. Okay, or array of type poll, I should say. Okay, and we are making use of HTTP over here. We are doing a get request, and yeah, we are calling the base URL over here. That is how it's working. Okay, and then I'm going to just make a replica of this, or let us type it by ourselves. Okay, we need one more method, which is vote, right? So I'm going to say poll ID over here, which is of type number. Oops, not null, it's number. And then I have option index, which is of type number. Okay, and then I have observable, which is of type void. Okay, something like this. All right, and then over here I'm going to say return this dot http dot post, and then I'm going to have void over here. Okay, and what we are going to do is we can make use of this kind of a syntax where we are going to make use of variables. Okay, so it will be clear as to why we are making use of this syntax. So I'm going to say this dot base URL. Okay, and then I'm going to say slash. Okay, we are going to make use of poll ID. Okay, so I'm going to say poll ID over here. Okay, and then I'm going to say slash vote. Okay, because this is what the syntax, or this is what the URL is. So if you come over here, okay, if you come over here for vote, okay, so this is the, okay, so how are we voting? We are actually passing in, oh, so there's a problem. Okay, it's not this URL, I made a mistake. So the endpoint that we should be using is this one. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here again. Okay, I try to construct this endpoint, but this is actually not the right one. So I'll just get rid of this. Okay, luckily there are not many changes that we need to do, not a lot of changes. Okay, I need to close this curly brace, and yeah, this URL is sorted. And I need to say, okay, we are not returning this, so this I'll remove. Okay, I'm going to just say, or we need to return actually. Okay, but I'll add one more step. So I'll say const URL, and I'll bring in the URL construction over here. Okay, so this is something that I'll get rid of. 1 second. Okay, so I'll just bring the URL construction over here. Okay, so it's slash vote, and we don't need this. Okay, So this is a URL, it's base URL / vote, because that is what we saw in the Postman. Okay. Now what I will do is I'll say this dot return HTTP post void, and over here I'll say URL. So for this URL, I need to send this data. Okay. So I'll send poll ID, comma, option index. Okay. This is the data that you need to send for vote, right? I'll just add some spaces over here, save. And you can review this in Postman over here. Okay, you can see poll ID and option index. Okay, so over here, that is what we are doing. Okay, so yeah, this is the service that we have set up. This is the models that we have set up. So yes, this is what we are going to use throughout our application. If needed, we'll do some refactoring, but for now, this looks really good. Okay, and the base URL is also fine. All right. So yeah, that's about how you can set up your service and how you can set up your model, which will represent the data that you'll use throughout your application. I hope this was useful. So now it's time that we begin creating our component and set it up in our application. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to execute a command. Okay, and this is what the command is going to be. Okay, so I'm going to make use of Angular CLI again. I'm going to say ng generate component poll, and I'm going to say skip test. I don't need test files. Okay, so that is what I'm specifying. Okay, if you want to write test cases, you can definitely have test files. Now I'm creating a component poll which will represent our polls, and it will be the main UI for our application. Okay, so I will hit enter, and you'll see 3 files being generated. Okay. HTML, TypeScript, and CSS, and this is being created in this folder under app. Okay, so if you go over here, you should see this folder and these files being added. All right, so yeah, the component is here. If you take a look at the source code here in the HTML, you just have one p tag, okay, which says poll works. Okay, so that is something that we'll be updating, but that is what it says by default. If you take a look at the CSS, there's no CSS over here. The component file is also a very basic generic file that has been generated. Okay. Now what I can do is I'll just minimize this. I'll come over here in app.component.html. So this is the file that is showing us the default page over here that you are seeing over here. Okay. For example, if you copy this hello poll app, and if you search over here, Control F, okay, we are not seeing poll app, but you'll see hello, and title is a variable. Okay, congratulations, your app is running. So that is what you're seeing over here. Okay, so you can see this is the file that is rendering the default HTML template or the default view over here. Okay, what I will do is I need to display the poll component, because that is where all the development is going to happen. So I'll come to the TypeScript file. I'll get rid of the router outlet over here, and I'll say poll component over here. Okay. Now this poll component, if you see, is coming in. So this poll component is coming in from this file. Okay. Poll/poll.component. Okay. I'll remove this import. Now where is this poll component? It's over here. This is the one. Okay. It has nothing right now, the default stuff. What I will do is I'll head over to HTML. Okay, not this HTML, but the main HTML, which is the app component.html. So app component TS and app component HTML are the 2 main files that is basically the root of our application. So app component serves in Angular, app component serves as the entry point for the entire application. Okay, so here we have this layout in the HTML file. I'll get rid of this layout, and I'll say app poll over here. Okay, and I'll close app poll. I'll save this. Okay, so I've got rid of the default HTML code that existed when we created the application. It came predefined, right? We did not define. I've modified this, and now if I come over here to the view, okay, you'll see poll works. I've zoomed in a lot. Okay, it won't display this big. I'm zoomed in by 400% so that you can see properly. Okay, it's poll works. And here, if you see poll component.html poll works, it's coming in from here. You can add, like I can add dots like these. And if you come over here, you can see dots like these. So indeed, now our HTML file is being rendered, and we have our component that is created, and it's being added to our application to display its HTML content. All right. So I hope this was useful and I hope you have been able to follow along. It's time that we configure our application with Bootstrap CSS. So Bootstrap, if you are not aware, it's a front-end toolkit, it says, and if you search for Bootstrap CSS, you will come on this official website. So we need to configure this, which is going to make UI pretty easy for us with some pre-built components, like predefined CSS for components, I should say. Okay, so that is what it's going to do. So we'll be making use of some buttons to test if things are working well. Okay, so this is what we are going to install. Okay, now how do we configure this? So I'll come over to our application, and over here, since we are making use of npm, okay, we have Node installed. So I'm going to make use of Node Package Manager. I'm going to say npm install Bootstrap, something like this. Okay, so this will install Bootstrap CSS globally. Okay, and yeah, all the packages are added. Now I'll head over to angular.json over here. Okay, now over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down. Okay, and here you'll see a tag or a property called styles. This is the styles property. So here we are making use of src/styles.css, which is over here. src/styles.css. It's over here. Okay, we need to add the Bootstrap CSS over here as well. Now here I'll add a comma, and I'll add 2 inverted commas, and I'll add this URL. So it's node modules /bootstrap/dist/css/bootstrap min css. So you can see over here under node modules, okay, you need to go to Bootstrap. So where is Bootstrap? Okay, can you see Bootstrap? Okay, if you scroll down, it's A, it's B over here, and here you have Bootstrap. Okay, dist css, and here you're going to see bootstrap min.css. Okay, so that's the file name, bootstrap min.css. So I need to see, okay, somewhere over here the file is there, css bootstrap grid. Here you can see bootstrap min css. So this is what we are linking. Okay, it already exists under node modules. How does it exist under node modules? Because we just installed Bootstrap, npm install Bootstrap, and it's been updated in your package.json for the project as well. You can see it's been added to the package. Okay, so I've added this. Okay, and I need to add it at one more place. So I'll just copy this link, and there is one more styles tag over here, or styles attribute or property, whatever you call it. If you scroll down, okay, here, you'll find this again, and just add it over here also. So I'll save this, okay, and I'll possibly restart the server. Okay, I'll restart. I'll say ng-serve. It should restart properly, and you now have Bootstrap configured. So if you refresh, you'll see a little bit of change in how it is being displayed now. Okay, so it's working fine, but I'm going to show you by adding a button. So we'll add a random button over here. Okay, if you search for Bootstrap CSS buttons, this is the page you will come on. You can like just pick this button, any button of your choice. So this is primary, secondary, success. I'll select primary. I'll copy the code. I'll come to app component.html and I'll add it over here. Okay, it auto reloads, and here if you come, you will see this primary button. Okay, I'm zoomed in a lot. I'll just tell you. So you can see this button appear this way, right? So Bootstrap CSS has been successfully configured into our project, and now we can go about building a beautiful UI. So now it's time that we implement the functionality wherein we can load all the polls from the backend database and display it onto the front end. So in backend, you might have some polls. So I do have maybe, okay, I have a couple of polls with a couple of options. So maybe you can create few polls, and that is what we are going to display right onto the front end. So what I would do over here is I would add a method I would call load polls. Okay, so this is a method that is going to fetch all the polls from the backend, and it is going to display over here. All right, so yeah, let's do this. So I'll say this. Okay, and we need an instance of poll service because we need to interact with the backend, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a constructor over here. Okay, I'm going to say constructor here, private, and I'm going to say poll service, and this is of type poll service over here. So this should auto add a import at the top of the file. Okay, and I'm going to open and close this empty constructor. You can see this import was added at the top. All right. Now, when loading polls, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make use of this dot poll service that I've just added. I'll say dot get polls. Okay. And I'll say subscribe over here. Okay. And then I'm going to get the data, right? Now, if you come over here to poll service, get polls, okay, it's returning observable, right? What it's returning? It is returning an observable, which is a stream of data, okay? And subscribe over here, we are making use of subscribe because subscribe is used to listen to the data that is being returned by the backend, and the data will be received asynchronously, which means the application doesn't freeze while waiting for the data. So that is what subscribe is all about, okay? So we are making use of this, and we need to handle the success and the error scenarios, right? So what I'm going to do is we are going to say over here success. So success is added by next over here. You can say next colon. Okay. This is what will define success. You can add a comma and you can have error over here, error scenario. Okay. So error meaning in case of any error. Okay. We'll get data over here. Okay. Something like this, data. Okay. And I'll take the data and over here, I'll say this dot polls is equal to data. Okay. Now we are getting an error on polls. What is polls? It's not defined, of course. So we need to add a variable that is going to keep track of polls. So I'll say polls. It is a array of type poll over here. Okay. And it's an empty. It's initialized to empty array. Okay. Now when I added poll as a type, this interface was imported automatically. Okay. That's Visual Studio Code Visual Studio Code behind the scenes working for you. All right. So I've done this. Okay. I'll just move this to the previous line over here, comma, error. Now, what is the error scenario? We are going to just display or lock the error over here. Okay. So I'll say something like this. I'll say error. We'll log the error to the console. I'll say error fetching polls, something like this. And I'll say error over here, like so. All right. So this is done. Yep, I feel. And we need to add a semicolon. That is it. I think we are done loading the polls. Okay. Now this needs to be called when the component or when the application loads over here. All right. So I hope this thing is pretty clear. Okay. We're actually making use of poll service to get the polls. We're subscribing because the get polls method is returning an observable which needs to be listened to, right? And once the data is fetched asynchronously, we have next being called if it's a success, else we have error in place over here. Okay. So that is how things are working right now. Okay. Now what we need to do is we need to initialize the data or load the polls when the application is loaded on the first launch. Okay, when the application is initialized, or I should say the component is initialized. So we are inside the component, right? So what we will do is we'll make use of on init interface, which we need to implement. So I'll say implements on init. You can see. Okay, I'm getting an error. Okay, because we need to, like you can see, incorrectly it does not implements on init or all the methods in it. Okay, so what we need to do is I need to implement a on init method over here. Okay, so I'll say over here after the constructor. Okay, after the constructor here, I'll say ng on init, and this is what we are going to do. I'm going to say this dot load polls, like so. Okay, this is it. So this is going to load all the polls for us when the component is initialized or mounted for the first time. All right. So because we need data and we have access to this data. Right now, what we need to do is we need to display this data onto the component HTML. That is what we are going to do. All right. So what we are going to do is here, I will get rid of this straight away. Okay, we don't need this. This was by default created, and we don't need this. Okay, so I'll simply start with h2. Oops, h2 over here. This h1 tag got left. Okay, I'll add a h2. I'll say available polls. Okay, come over here. We should see available polls. Why are we not seeing it? Okay, poll component.html. It's saved. Okay, some problem maybe. Let me check. So I came over here. I was not getting a response. I opened the console, like by right click, inspect and console, and I'm seeing this error. Okay, so it says null injection error is no provider for HTTP client. So we need to provide HTTP client and we need to add it to our main application. So what I will do is I'll come over here. Okay, and here we have main.ts. Okay, so inside main.ts, what I will do is I'll come over here. Okay, I have bootstrap dot over here app component, and here instead of app config, okay, so we have this config created over here. Okay, so here we have a provider defined. Okay, so I'll just come over here. Okay, this is the provider. Okay, I'll add one more provider over here. I'll say HTTP, or I'll say provide HTTP client. Okay, provide HTTP. Wait a minute. So I'll say provide HTTP client, something like this. Okay, and like this. Okay, so it's added. You can see provide HTTP client is imported over here. Okay, and we have added this in app config.ts because this is the configuration file that is being used over here. Okay, you can see the configuration being passed here. Okay, let us see if this is okay. You can see now it's working fine. Get request was done, and what happened? It failed. Okay, which is okay for now. Okay, we are so CORS policy is not enabled, which is absolutely okay. We'll fix this soon. But for now, I'll just minimize this because the API calls are working and we are seeing this available polls over here. Okay, this is done. Now what I will do is we can actually fix this issue. Okay, we can actually fix the backend, or we'll first deal with the front end. Okay, so I'll just close this because we are done with these two files. Okay, now what we will do is we will have a logic over here which will work through the poll to get us the poll list. Okay, so I'm going to say div over here like so. Okay, I'm going to add one more div. We are going to style all these divs over here. Okay, and over here within this div I'm going to say ng4 okay is equal to okay, and I'm going to say let poll of polls. Okay, so I'm getting the poll of polls. Now what is polls over here? This is polls from the component. Okay, so I'm getting this. Okay, this is we are using ng4 to loop through all the polls because we have an basically an array, right? So to display all the polls we need to loop through it. Okay, and you can see it is a part of commons module and we need to add it. Okay, what I will do is I'll come over here and here in imports I'll say there are no imports, so I'll say common module, and I'll also add form module which will be useful. Okay, so I'll say forms module which will be useful once we start building the form to create the polls. So I've added these two imports over here. Okay, right, this is done. And now if you come to HTML, the ng4 error actually goes away. Okay, so I'm saying this, and here I'll add class, okay, which will be added shortly. Okay, but over here we need to say h3 over here, and I'll say poll question. Okay, so it will be poll dot question like so. Okay, and then over here we will have another div over here. Okay, and then over here I'll have one more div. I'm adding some divs which will help us style this. Okay, and over here I'll say ng4. Okay, so for all the options, so now we are iterating through the question, right? We also need to iterate through all the options, right? So I'll say ng4, and over here I'll say let option of poll dot option, something like this. Okay, poll dot options, and I'll add a semicolon. Okay, we need a this is done. Okay, and okay, I'll also say let I is equal to index, something like this over here. Okay, so this is done over here, and I don't think anything else. Okay, class, this is okay. Now I'll add a button over here. Okay, button. Okay, and I'll close this, and we'll add some things like click. What should happen on click? Okay, so on click, it should vote, right? I won't define this because we need a function in place to define that. Okay, so right now I'll stick to class over here. We'll add classes, a few classes, and inside button tag we will display the option text over here. Okay, this is the option text that we will display, and over here we'll display within the pair of round braces, we'll display. Okay, here I'll say option dot votes, something like this. Okay, so this is done, and I'll have a text over here. I'll say votes, something like this. Okay, this is done. All right, so we have this set. Okay, and what we can do is we can fix the CORS issue. All right, so that is something we need to add. So I'll switch over to the backend code over here. Okay, this is the backend, and here I'll head over to controller and I'll scroll up. We'll add a small annotation over here, CORS cross origin. Okay, and I'll say origins. Okay, and I'll add, we need to add the origin. So where are we making the request from? We are making it from localhost 4200. Oops. So I'll paste that over here. This is done. Okay, we need to of course restart the backend once we make any configuration changes. So this says allow request from this particular origin for this controller. That is what it says, to be clear. Okay, if you come here, you can do a refresh and you'll see, okay, we are seeing the data, right? We are seeing the data. You can see, what is your favorite programming language? We are seeing the data. Which programming language would you like to learn? We are seeing it. But there is one problem. We are not seeing the votes. And why are we not seeing it? So let me see over here. One possible problem that I see here is, one second. So here it's called option text. Okay. Let me go to backend. Here it's called, okay, vote option. So we are calling it vote option and vote count. Okay, and here we are calling it votes. So we need to make sure, because the same data we are passing on to the backend, right? So we need to make sure like they both have like the same terminology, or at least we do some sort of mapping here. But we are not doing any sort of mapping, right? So what we will do is we'll just rename this. So a better name for this would be, I feel, it's option text and vote count. Okay, vote count over here, something like this. Okay, and over here also I'll update it to the same. So in fact I like option text as this, because vote option is not a good name. This actually is representing the text, right? So we'll say option text and vote count. This is it. But now the problem is we have updated the entity. So let us restart and see if we are able to see the changes into the database being reflected. Okay, let us see. Okay, no errors so far. Let us check the database. So here it was being called earlier as option text. Okay, vote count. Okay, so what it did is it added a new field called option text, which is not the right thing to go about. What I will do is I will simply reset the database. Okay, so I'll get rid of these two. Okay, we'll delete this. I'll delete drop table, drop now. Okay, and drop table, drop now. Okay, so this is done. Oops, wait, I need to drop this, drop now. Okay, this is done. Now the table do not exist. I'll restart the application. Let us see how things work, and we'll recreate the votes, okay, or the polls, I mean to say. So I'll refresh. Okay, refreshed. Now let us try running a query for poll. There is no poll for poll option. Okay, earlier we had one extra column called option text. If I run this, okay, now the extra column is gone, but the data is also gone. So we need to add the data again. Okay, so what I will do is I'll create a poll, and instead of vote option, it is option text now. Option text, right? This is what it is. Text. So I'll add this everywhere. Okay, it's a small change. Okay, I'll vote count and questions. Okay, we'll send this. Let us see if it works. It worked fine. Okay, we have everything created. Which programming language would you like to learn? Okay, and which is, I'll do a control C over here so that we are back to the old. Okay, we aren't. Oops. So I'll stick to this. The old question is not coming in over here, so I'll just add a new question. Okay, what is your favorite programming language? Okay, and I'll add things like Java, C, and C++. Okay, C was already added, so I'll add JavaScript over here. Something like this. I'll send this. Okay, this is done. Okay, and we'll check the database once. Okay, let me check it. So, okay, you have things in the right order over here. You have things in the right way over here. Okay, you can also vote over here. So vote will go this way. You can vote. You can see, okay, it should work fine. There should not be any issues. You can see the vote being recorded against poll ID 1. Okay, so backend is fine. We'll do a hard refresh over here. Okay, you can see votes does not exist. Okay, so we started getting error because we renamed the interface over here, vote count, right? So I'll come over here to component and we'll update it to vote count. So wherever you're getting red marks, just update it to vote count. You would ideally get it at one place only because we have not used it at a lot of places, and now you're seeing all the data. You can see, right? You're seeing all the data. Now if I add one more vote from the backend, let me add one more vote. So this time I'll add it to poll ID 1 and option 2. Let's send. I'll come over here to front end. Okay, so it's in this poll, but for the option 2, let us refresh. You can see React has one vote now. So this is 0, 1, 2. Okay, so it's working fine. You are able to see the data as well. Okay, let's add a bit of styling and let's make it a little bit pretty. Okay, so what I will do is I'll start from here just below h2. Oh, we should start with h2 in fact. Okay, I'll add class. I'll say empty-4 and I already have some CSS. I'll say text center. Okay, so this will centerize the text. You can see, right? Now over here for div, I'll say here for class, okay, so for this particular div, I'll say border rounded and p3 and mp3. Okay, mb-3, something like this. Okay, let us see. Okay, you have a border being added. You have a border in place now. Okay, now for question. Okay, we won't do anything for question. Question is good. I'll add this for options list. Okay, so this will be options list. Okay, these are all classes just in case we do any sort of custom styling. But over here for div, over here nothing. For button, let's do it for button. Okay, so for button, I'm going to say btn. Okay, btn outline. These are all button tags that you have. Okay, we are adding a primary button. If you save this, you'll see primary buttons. You can see. Okay, and now over here, I'm going to say me-2 and mt-2. Okay, you can see these are all margins that we have added. Okay, and if you're curious as to what button we have added over here, so these are outline buttons. Okay, in Bootstrap. So you can come over here and you can see these outline buttons. Okay, so we have used this first one. Okay, the primary one. Okay, so it's looking cool, I would say, and I don't think anything else is needed. I think we're pretty good, right? So we can add one more class over here just in case we add any sort of custom CSS for us over and above Bootstrap. I'll say polls list. Okay, so this is done and we are all set to work on the next set of things, and you can see how we are able to fetch the data from the backend, okay, using Angular. Okay, so if you zoom out, this is how it's going to look like. Okay, you'll see more polls coming in, okay, based on how you add polls. All right, so I hope you have been able to follow along and I hope this is useful. If you're enjoying this course so far, then you should also check out our complete full stack development mastery roadmap, the details of which are given in the description below. It comprises of multiple courses that you would have access to. Also, you'll find these details on the website as well. All right. The website is embarkx.com, and I would highly encourage you all to check this out to become a pro developer. So now it's time that we work on the functionality that will enable us to create polls over here in our application. So what I would do is I would switch over here and we have this HTML file open. Okay. So here is where I'll begin. So first thing, I'll add a Bootstrap container over here. Okay. So I'll add a div with class container. Okay. Container, and I'll have a margin top of 4. Okay, so this is something that I've had added, and I'll wrap this entire piece of code into this one. Okay, all right, this is done. Now, if you see over here, this will be much more aligned and much more, there'll be a bit of padding around it. Okay, so this looks much better. Now what I'll do is I would create a h2. Okay, I would say create poll, and over here I'm going to add a class. Okay, so I'll say class is equal to text center, something like this. So we have this create poll at the top now. Okay, now what we need is we need a text box first of all, which is an input box to create a poll. So I'm going to say div. Okay, I'll say class margin bottom of 3. Okay, and then inside this div I'm going to have an input. Okay, so something like, okay, so I'm going to self close it. Now over here we'll need some attributes to be added. Okay, so here I'll say I'll have a placeholder over here. What is a placeholder? So I'll say poll question. Okay, something like this. Okay, and then I'm going to have class, which is form control over here. Okay, and I'll mark this field as required. All right. Now, if you come over here, you can see this text field being added. Okay, with the placeholder poll question. All right. Now I'll actually bind this. Okay, so I'll say ng model over here. Okay, something like this. Okay, ng model, and I'm going to bind this to new poll dot question. Okay, now I'm likely seeing an error, or not likely, I'm actually seeing an error over here. Now new poll does not exist, and that is why it's throwing an error over here, right? So what we need to do is we also need to create, or we also need to have a new poll being created into our TypeScript file. Okay, and it is going to hold the poll data that user is currently creating. Okay, so what I would do is I would come over here to poll. Okay, this is polls component. All right, and just above the array over here, okay, inside this component definition over here, right here. Okay, right here, I'm going to say new poll colon, I'll say poll, and something like this. Okay, like so, and I'll say ID over here 0, and I'll say question. I'll add question as empty. So this is representing a new poll, right? So I'll have basically all these things set up, and we'll initialize this to some default values. Okay, now options. Now initially I'll have 2 options. Okay, which I'll have user the liberty to add. Okay, along with vote count over here, which is also set to 0 over here. Okay, and I'll copy this and I'll add comma and I'll paste it over here. Okay, so 2 options that we have, and we have initialized this. Okay, so this is not semicolon, this is a comma, something like this. All right, so this is new poll. This is representing a new poll in our application that is being created. So you can see the error also went away. Now whatever I enter in poll question will be binded to this particular property over here from new poll. Okay, so yeah, this is done. What we need to do now is I would start defining the inputs that will enable user to create a new poll. Okay, so that is something that I'm going to do. Okay, so here I have input. Now right after the input over here, okay, or right after the div over here, after this div, okay, after the question div, I'll add a new div over here. I'll say div, okay, and I'll say class, and I'll say options, and I'll say container, something like this, and I'll have margin bottom of 3 over here. Okay, I'll add a div. Okay, and what is this div going to do? It is going to say ng4 over here. Okay, and ng4 is going to say let option of new pool dot options. Okay, so we need to create a new input box for every option that we want to add. All right, so I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say let I is equal to index. Okay, and I'm going to say track by over here, and track by, I'll say track by index. Oops, something like this. Okay, and then we'll add a couple of classes as well. So I'll say class over here. Class is, or let me move this class piece to new line so that it's better visible over here. New class is input. Oops, input group. This is one of the classes for Bootstrap, and I'll say margin bottom of 2. Okay, something like this. So this is what it is. Now what this is allowing us to do is basically this is generating new field for each option. Okay, so each option in new poll over here, something like this. Okay, and basically this thing iterates over each option, allowing users to add multiple option. Okay, and for each option there is a field that we are going to add, which is bound to option.text over here. Okay, option.text, and we'll also add buttons, add and remove, which will enable basically, which will enable user to add more options if they wish to. Okay, so that is something we'll do later on. But for now, let's finish this functionality where we at least see a couple of input boxes. So here I'm going to say input. Okay, here input. Okay, and okay, let me close this. So actually this input is going to look like this input itself. I'll just copy this, okay, and I'll paste it over here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is here new poll dot option, not new poll, it should be option dot option text. Option dot option text, and I'll have option over here. Okay, something like this. Form control required. All right, so this is done, and yeah, this is it. Let me save this. Let me come over here. Okay, track by index does not exist, so this is something that we need to handle. So I'll come over here, and here in poll component, I'll scroll down. Okay, let us scroll down, and over here I'll say track by index. Track by index. So this particular thing is going to help Angular efficiently render the list of options by using the index as the unique identifier. That is what it's doing. So I'm going to say index, okay, and I'm going to say number over here, okay, and here I'm going to say number, and then I'm going to just return index, something like this. Okay, this is done, and technically now it should work. You can see 2 options over here. Okay, now what we can do is we can add a button that will enable users to create a poll. Okay, so I'll come over here, and here just above available polls. Okay, here I'm going to say button. Okay, and then so over here I'm going to say class, and I'll add btn secondary. No, btn primary. Let this be primary. Okay, so we'll add one more button over here, which will allow user to add another option, so that can be secondary. Okay, and I'll say create poll. Okay, so this is done, and I'll have to add a on click for this one. Okay, so on click, I'll say click, and I'll say create poll, something like this. Okay, now create poll does not exist, of course. So this is something that we will need to define. Now what happens on create poll? Okay, so on create poll, basically we would be pushing the data via the service to our backend server. So I'll come over here. Okay, after load polls, maybe I can add a new method over here. I'll say create poll over here. Okay, and I'll say here, I'll say this dot poll service dot create poll. Okay, and I'll say this dot new poll dot subscribe, and then over here, so I'll end this with the semicolon here. Okay, and now over here, so basically I've subscribed to the broadcast, and now I need to handle the success and error scenario. So success will be this over here. Okay, and error will be something like this. Okay, now what I'm going to do over here for success is created poll. Okay, and then over here like so. Okay, I'll add a comma, and then over here I'm going to say this dot polls. Okay, dot push, and I'm going to push in the created polls over here. Okay, and yeah, this is it. I think we also need to handle the error scenario, so I'll say error. Okay, and you can say console log error. Okay, but I'm not going to type in that entire line because I believe we've already typed in over here. So I can just copy this, come over here and paste it, something like this, right? This is done. So how it works is it is actually pushing the data to the backend server right from here. So whatever poll object whatever poll we want to create is being pushed to the backend via create poll over here. Okay, and then after creating the poll, okay, what we are doing is so here, if it's successful, we are also pushing the poll to the array over here. So what is polls? You can see over here, polls is the array. That is what we are doing. So let's see if this is working. Okay, let us see this in action. Okay, so I'll say testing poll creation. Okay, option 1 test, option 2 test, and I'll say create a poll. Okay, there is no feedback over here. We have not added any feedback. Ideally this should get cleared or something like that, but let us check in the database whether this worked. So I'll come over here, I'll run this. You can see testing poll creation. Okay, and in poll options, let us see. Okay, you can see option 1 test, option 2 test. So this is working absolutely fine. Okay, with no issues as such. All right, so we are able to push the data, but what we are doing is there is one problem. We are not resetting the poll. Okay, so resetting the poll is important because like after the poll is created, you need to like clear all the data. Okay, so what we can do is after create poll, I can add a reset poll over here. Okay, and over here I'm going to say this dot new poll, or let me just copy this. Okay, so I'll just copy this and we'll basically initialize the new poll object to what it was initially. Okay, something like this. Okay, and I'll say this dot new poll. Okay, so yeah, this is it. And after the poll is successfully created over here, I'm going to call the reset poll. Okay, something like this. So this is done. Okay, and I'll come over here. Let us test this. Okay, so I'll say new poll again, option 1 new, option 2 new. I'm just creating random polls, So I'll say create poll, and you can see the poll got recreated, and you can see the new poll got added over here. You can see, right? So this won't work yet, or the vote buttons. Okay, but we'll get this sorted. Okay, so it's now completely dynamic, wherein you are able to create polls and you are able to see all the changes being also reflected into the database. So you can check this over here. Okay, you should see options being reloaded. You can see 2 options. Okay, and then over here you can see new poll again. Okay, so it's working absolutely fine, and I hope you have been able to follow along, and I hope this was useful. Now it's time that we begin working on the voting functionality. As of now, we're not able to vote from our front-end application, right? So what I'm going to do is over here in our poll component.html, I'm going to add a on click over here. So this is the vote button. Okay, this code is representing vote over here, right? So what I will do is I'll say click vote, and I'm going to call this as I'll say poll ID over here. Okay, so for voting we are going to need two things. One is the poll ID and the index which is being voted. Okay, so I'll say poll ID and I over here. Okay, that is what I'm doing. Now this function, of course, or this method does not exist. Of course, you're going to get errors if you visit the application after saving. Okay, what we are going to do is we are going to create this. All right, so here I'll come in after resetting poll, wherever I'm going to say vote, and I'm going to say poll ID first of all. Okay, this is of type number. I'm going to say option index. Okay, and this is of type number again over here. Okay, and over here then I'm going to say this dot poll service dot subscribe. Oops, subscribe. Sorry, not subscribe, vote. Basically, we'll have to call the vote function. So here, if you see, there is a vote method. So this is vote method. We are accepting poll ID and option index, right? So our backend API also accepts this, the poll number and the option index, right? So that these two things we are passing in. So here I'll say poll ID and I'll say option index. Okay, and then subscribe. Okay, something like this over here. All right. So this is what we are going to define. Now we are subscribing because I'll tell you, we are sending over here an observable, right? So we have subscribed. Now in a similar fashion like we have done for other functionality, we'll need a next and an error. So I'll get this. Okay, and here I'll say next and error. Okay, now for next, of course, this is not how it will be. We don't need anything over here, no parameter. And here I'll say what I will do is I'll first get the poll. Okay, once I get the poll, I'm going to increment the vote count of that option index by 1. Okay, so this is something that I'm doing locally, okay, on success, right? Why am I doing this? Because here what we have done is we have voted the backend. Okay, we have sent the voting data to the backend. So the data in the backend is updated. You can update the front end as well. Okay, or the data that you are maintaining locally over here. So this polls array is what I'm talking about, right? So we'll update the polls array on success. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say const poll is equal to this dot polls. So from the polls first, I'll get find over here. Okay, I'm going to say p, and I'm going to make use of arrow p dot id over here, and I'm going to say if this is equal to poll id, something like this. Okay, now this is done, and over here I'm going to say if poll. Okay, if there is poll, if poll exists, then I'm going to say poll dot options. All right, and here I'm going to say option text. Okay, option. Sorry, not option text, option index. We need to get option. We need to get the option using the index, and I'm going to say vote count over here, and I'm going to increment this by 1, something like this. Right, this is done, and that is it. Error fetching polls. Here we have error voting on a poll. Okay, and if you scroll up, this is an error on creating polls. Okay, so I actually had copied this error message from the top, but I forgot renaming this. Okay, so instead of for create poll, it is going to be error creating polls. Okay, it doesn't matter. Actually, it's a message, but I don't want you all to be confused if you get any sort of errors, because you will see over here, if you don't rename this, you will see error fetching polls, and then you will be like, oh, this is getting printed probably. That's not the case, right? So it's good to have the right messaging as well. Okay, I'll save this, and we can have a test. Let us see how this works. Okay, so I'll increase the vote for React by 1. You can see it got incremented to 2. Let us see if we are seeing the same in the backend. Okay, so for React, you can see initially it is 1 over here, right? 1. I'll run this again. Now you have 2 over here. So clearly the vote is working fine, right? You can vote as many things you want. Okay, it is going to increment it in the right way, right? So this functionality is working absolutely fine, and I hope you have been able to follow along and build this along with me, right? So I hope this was useful. So now what we're going to do is, here we have an option to add 2 polls, right? Now if user wants more polls, he should be able to add, right? Right now he's not able to, right? And we should have a minimum requirement as well. So he should be ideally able to add at least 2 polls and not less than that, because only then it's a poll, right? He has to select at least one of 2 options, like, or vote one of 2 options. And you should be able to add more options if user wants, right? So how can you make that happen? So we are going to add some front-end logic over here, which is going to help us manage that. Okay, because backend is flexible. Whatever number of options you add to backend, it will just add it for you, right? You have to manage it in front end, where you add these fields on behalf of user or for user, right? So I'll come over here, and in HTML file, I'll head over here. Okay. And what we would do is over here, around like just before create poll, I'm going to add one more button over here. Okay. This is not a create poll button. Okay. But this is a, so I'll call this button as add a poll or add another poll. Okay. Add another poll, right? And on click, it will basically, what it will do is it will say add option, right? Now what is add option? Add option is actually a function which we have not defined yet. Okay, we need to define that. So I'll scroll up properly over here, and I'll add an option. Now what we will do is, here what this function will do is add option, it will say, and over here it is going to say, so we need to update this. This is representing a poll that user is about to add, right? So we need to update this. Here it is showing 2 options. So if I remove one option will disappear from the front end. You can see, right? If I add one more option over here, and if I save this, you'll see 2 options now, right? So that the UI is bound or binded to this particular poll over here, because this is representing the poll that user is creating, right? So what I will do is, here when we say add option, I'm going to say this dot new poll dot options dot push. I'm going to add one more option over here. Okay, and it will be the same structure as we have, right? Something like this. Okay, so I'm going to add this. Oops, we missed deleting this, and I'll save this, right? Now if you come over here, if you say add another poll, you'll see you can keep on adding. But the thing is, there's no option to remove, right? So there has to be an option to remove if the poll or if the option count is greater than 2, right? So that is the logic that we need to manage. So what I will do is, I will come over here again, and in HTML file, basically over here, okay, I'll add a remove button. Okay, so I'll say button, and I'll mark this as remove, something like this. Okay, over here, and I'll call this as class is button danger, like so. Okay, so you can see this has been added, but this should actually be displayed only if you have more than 2 polls, right? So what I will do is, I'll come over here, okay, and I'll say so I'll add if over here. Okay, ng if, something like this. Oops, like so. And over here, I'm going to say new poll dot options dot length. So this is a condition. If new poll dot options dot length is greater than 2, then display this, right? And we are seeing that the opening tag of button is not terminated. So where's the problem? Oops. So this is a problem. Okay. Now it looks fine. Okay. And now it will be visible only if, you can see, it is visible only if, okay, but the CSS is not being applied. So let me see. Oh, so the class thing is removed. I'm sorry about that. Okay. So this should be fine now. Okay. Now if you see, this button is coming in only if the options are greater than 2, right? And what I will do is I need to also have a way to, so on click something should happen, right? So there has to be a way for user to remove the option, right? So I'll say over here, click, okay, and I'll say new poll dot options dot splice, and I'll say I comma 1. So this is going to remove the option. Okay, so let us see if this is working. So I'll say add another poll, and I'll say remove. You can see it's removing, right? So this is working absolutely fine in the interface, and this is allowing us to add more options as you want. Okay, so you can say testing new poll creation over here. Okay, I'll say option 1 test. Okay, I'll add, okay, option 2 test, something like this, option 3 test. Okay, I can say create a poll, and here you will see the poll being created, and you can also vote it. Okay, so yeah, this is the functionality that we had to do on front end, and I hope you're pretty clear as to what we are doing, why we are doing. Okay, I've gone pretty step by step, and I hope this is clear and useful to you all.